there is an education crisis in the world, which is much more pronounced in the developing countries.
How do we design the curriculum in a manner that it responds to the job market?
As parents and as communities, we have a responsibility to raise and educate our children.
Welcome to State of Africa. I'm George Ndirango. Let's pick up where we left off on the conversations held at the Africa Leadership Forum in Uganda. We turn our focus to a cornerstone of sustainable development, that's poverty eradication and economic growth. The African continent is determined to end poverty in all its forms, a commitment that aims to lift millions out of extreme poverty. To support this, different African countries are actively addressing hunger, ensuring food security, and advancing sustainable agriculture. A panel of experts joined our moderator, Dr. Julie Gishuru, President and CEO at the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute, to interrogate this a little further.
This is a crucial discussion for Africa. In the early 2000s in Kenya, when free primary education was declared, it was implemented. It was messy. There were lots of students in classes. For a few years, there was a lot of confusion, but it ended up sticking and it worked. And I think that was political will. And so maybe the first question I'll come to the panel with is, how do we address these numbers? And perhaps, to the education experts, we need to give ourselves the grace of saying it might need to be phased in terms of how we improve and improve. Or is there an example we can take as Africa from other parts of the world? What should we be doing? So let me start, Your Excellency, as a leader with you and your experience in leadership. Your Excellency, Dr. Kikwete, how do we achieve this for Africa? What are the things we must do?
Having been involved on education matters for quite a while, I've been a member of the Commission on Financing Global Education. We worked for about 2 to 3 years. The conclusion was there is an education crisis in the world, which is much more pronounced in the developing countries. Its characteristics are: one, there are still too many boys and girls, children and young people who are supposed to be in school but are not in school. It's 240 million globally. When you take all the 6 continents, again, you can see the problem, how the situation on the continent. The second aspect of this was that even those who are in school, 33% in primary school, don't complete their education. Ambassador, if we were talking about 1 in 5, I think, it's about the same. So that's another important, because we're not talking about 2 or 3%, but over 33%, it's a lot. And the third aspect, those who are in school, the learning outcomes are low, which means that they don't get the skills for that level of education. This is the general. Ambassador Sefu was much more in the details of every aspect. We spoke about the issues of access, the issues of quality, the issues of equity. But one important factor that was raised, which is now the preoccupation of us in the Global Partnership for Education, as I said, it's an institution established by the G7 21 years ago to promote quality education in the developing countries. I am the 3rd chair of the board in the 21 years. The first was an American, the second was an Australian, the former Prime Minister of Australia, and then the third is me. One day Gordon Brown called me, says there is this we are looking for a chair, and we think you can be the chair. So fine, if you have trust in me, then that's fine. It is the organization, it is organized, they established it, and they are paying for its budget. It's a huge budget, $5 billion, and the next replenishment is next year. We are looking for $15 billion. And it's among the developed countries that are contributing to that budget. But besides the developed countries contributing, we in the developing countries have also made a vow that we must, our children, they are not the children of donors. We also have to invest in our own children. So there was an understanding that each country on the African continent should set aside at least 20% of the national budget for education. But then we created a track for countries now to make your own contribution. The commitment was 20% of the national budget to be set aside for education. This is a compact. We asked countries to sign this compact, and only 20 countries signed. At that time, and we had appointed President Kenyatta to be the champion, to be champion, talk to his peers, and encourage them to contribute. Now you can see only 20%, only 20 countries signed the compact. After Kenyatta retired, we took Nana Akufo-Addo to be the champion. After Nana Akufo-Addo retired, we are now going to choose for another African leader to be the champion. But the work of the champion is to encourage countries to contribute 20% of their budgets for education. If there is anything that I would really emphasize, there is this compact of countries setting aside 20% of their national budgets for education. If there is a message that all of us should carry when we go back home, those who are in government should carry, there is this compact. Yeah. Please, we are contributing for our children and our children's children. For me, I have no child in school. I'm a grandfather now. I have 15 of them. So I'm contributing for my grandchildren. So that is what I could say to start with, that 20% of the national budget for education, if we can do that, I'm sure we will make a lot of progress with education in our respective countries.
To Charles Kimpolo, let me come to you now. When you look at the pathway forward, you're in it, this is your work. What are the crucial next steps we must take? How do we move forward?
The way forward, so the way I look at education is three components. First is access. Are we going to be a massification policy where we just give access to everyone? Is that the way to go? It's good to make it free, equitable, ensure that it's not excluding people. That one. The second one is quality. So what kind of student are we talking about? The teachers. Are we changing what we have been doing for generation? Someone said, I think it was Albert Einstein, which said that it is insane to continue doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. I think your question is how do we move forward? One other component people have not been talking about education is relevance. Okay? For what? I think you made it very clear. The worship of degrees, marks, that's where past excellence in our time was you be top of a class 100%. I think the private sector is not looking at that. It's not good enough. Relevance of education. How do we design the curriculum in a manner that it responds to the job market? That's the job I've been doing at the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, to really look at education from a supply perspective. Right? We're supplying the skills, we're supplying students, but people who are consuming the skills that we are supplying are from the other side. It's very important to bring everyone on the table so that we design curriculum that respond to the market needs, which is not fixed. Market need will never be fixed. with emerging technology, now we're talking about AI, it's going to continue to change. How are we going to make our education system agile, which is not a good word for politician, because being agile requires change of mindset, in a manner that we adjust to change, in a manner that we develop curriculum in a way that it really responds to the needs. So for me, relevance is one component that we're saying. And for us to do that is really to develop new partnership. Shouldn't we use technology to empower the teachers so that they can use AI to deploy the same content, to be at the center of curriculum delivery, to reach more people in a short time where we don't compromise quality? Shouldn't we bring the private sector? I like the fact that you're putting the budget of government at 20%. My role at AIMS have always been seeing the private sector creating their own academy. I think the reason they're doing that is because they don't trust anymore our education system and university. They're creating the academy because they acknowledge that the education system, university, or whatever you call it, are not preparing the graduate to the job that you have. I think maybe the conversation is to bring them on board to say, how can we adjust the curriculum in a way that it responds to your need? And we do it together so that you can bring some resources, so that we can do it together, because I think education should be a common purpose for everyone.
No, fantastic. Thank you for that. Let's give him a round of applause for that. What is quality education for Africa? We gathered 16 African ministers of education in Lagos, Nigeria, and we met to discuss these issues. And the discussion evolved from educational access to technology to what education for Africa. And we asked the question, think of a young man in northern Kenya, Turkana, sitting under a tree. A boy of 9 years old, a girl of 9 years old. What education do they need to be successful in their realities compared with those in urban settings? In Canada, there's some incredible work that the foundation I used to be with, the MasterCard Foundation, does with indigenous communities, where the indigenous communities refuse to take scholarships to go to the big universities in the cities. They said, no, many years ago you came and took our native people, and we're digging mass graves now of children who died in missionary schools and in your school. So we're not leaving our land. Also, we honor our land and we believe in conservation, so we want to stay close to our land. So what happened was, an education system was built around the indigenous communities, where they decided what was important for them. How to clean the rivers, how to fish the salmon, how to bring back the populations, the herds of bulls, etc., etc., etc. How to do that intricate sewing, traditional sewing. And the university that was created allowed grandmother to create a course where she was teaching grandchildren and others how to do traditional sewing. And the grandmother was paid for that. And that was to keep the traditions alive. Yesterday we talked about indigenous plants and herbs. And is Africa bold enough to look at her curriculum and ask, what are we teaching our young people? I keep asking teachers, why did I have to learn that a man called David Livingstone and a man called Henry Morton Stanley met somewhere on our shores of East Africa, and one said to the other, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Why is that even in my head? Because I had to learn it in school. How many learned that? How many learned that? Nearly everybody in this room learned that, Dr. Livingstone. Why did we learn that? What business is it of ours? And so can we also start to recreate? So I've just injected that. I want us to come back to it, but let me come to the economist now and really ask your perspective on the whole issue, but also dive deeper for us into the question of funding and your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Let me start by defending history. I think history is very important for us to know, even if it might not have practical relevance in our day-to-day lives, especially if you're going to ask the question of the relevance of education in our societies. If we have no clue about where we're coming from, you can be sure we have no clue about where we are going. And maybe let me start from there. In my own perspective, the challenge with our continent as a whole, and education in particular, is a crisis of imagination. 60 years after independence, we are grappling with the same questions that our forefathers grappled with, attempted to resolve, made some headway, and today we are still trying to resolve those same challenges. Unfortunately for us, there seems to be a sort of dead end we have run into intellectually that we cannot seem to find our way through this fog of challenges. And so it's going to be of utmost importance for us to draw on new streams of thinking, bold, courageous thought that does not necessarily align itself perfectly with conventional thinking that has brought us where we are in the first place. And to be able to do that, it is important for us to realize as Africans in general that in fact we are at war. Being on a war footing requires that we do things in a very extraordinary manner. We cannot seek to build societies as if things are laissez-faire, as if things are normal, okay? We must engage our intellects, our minds in very critical, deep ways to be able to come up with new, unconventional ways of thinking about some of these challenges. Unless we recognize that we are under an existential threat, which in contemporary times is manifesting as rollbacks of donor budgets, the crisis of democracy in our continent having failed to deliver the prosperity that it promised, etc., etc. If we are unable to realize that we are facing an existential moment, we shall continue comfortably to think about our problems in the same ways we've done for so long without making any breakthrough. So in the realm of education, what might that look like? Number one, I think that the centralization of planning, development planning within the state at the national level needs to be rethought so that you give some autonomy to local levels, sub-regional levels to do some planning. That could help us with some of the funding challenges in the following ways. I get very heartbroken when I watch news here in Uganda. I'm from Uganda. And there is a distant place that is calling out the government to help them construct a pit latrine. And these are adults with children, but saying government should come and help us construct a pit latrine. You have like 1,000, 2,500 people, and all of them are just living carefree, waiting for government to come and build for them a pit latrine. Okay, let's take it away from a pit latrine and talk about a classroom. How on earth could you be adults, you've parented children, and you can dare complain that children are studying under trees, and it's not conducive, and suddenly you're waiting for government to come and build classrooms in those localities? With an environment that you're inhabiting that in fact has all the components you require to construct a basic classroom that can house students to study away from the vagaries of nature, okay? So if there is some decentralization in some of the implementation of development, and in particular education, we shall stop the infantilization of our people, thinking that central government must resolve everything for them, and they can start to take some responsibility. The second way it can help is integrating economies. With decentralization, I once read a story in Zimbabwe. I think the currency had collapsed, and now parents were paying for school fees using goats. The school term starts, you go with your 4 goats, you talk to the head teacher, you give the goats, they admit the child. When I was young, it was a very funny story, and I used to tout my Zimbabwean friends about just how terrible things were in their country. But in hindsight, perhaps that sort of integration of local economies, where needs can be integrated. If you have a farming community that can produce what teachers need, the money they're going to need in compensation as wages can be driven down if part of that is subsidized by the economic value that is produced by the parents of kids in those localities. But that might only be possible if there is some sort of decentralization and decision making, and we are not waiting on the central government to bring the money, to construct the classrooms, to bring the chalk, to buy the desks, etc., etc. So there must be a shift away from this infantilization of our people in thinking that the state is going to do the thinking for them. So much so that they want classrooms to be built, desks to be constructed for them, toilets to be built for them by the central government. The other point I want to make is on the point of human resource, still related to funding. Where do we get the money to train all the teachers? We've talked about the fact that many kids are dropping out of school, and I wonder if there's a difference between dropping out and graduating. You know, at the end of the day, we're all going to be looking for what to do with ourselves. That may not necessarily have to do with what we learned in school. But you have this army of school leavers that could be trained through maybe some form of national service program that can go back in their communities and undertake facilitation of learning as volunteers, as pre-primary or primary school teachers. But they're roaming around the cities, being problems, raising our population growth rate, and contributing no economic value in the country because we have failed to engage them productively. So capitalizing on the army of school leavers we have who are desperately searching for jobs, part of that human resource can be leveraged, channeled into some of these working as volunteers to provide education for the younger ones that are still coming up, to plug the gaps in human resource, to plug the gaps in competence, etc., etc. Finally, the question of technology. I started by saying that we must recognize that we are on a war footing. And being on a war footing requires that we don't do things in normal ways, okay? I appreciate that the world is making tremendous progress technologically. 60% of our continent is rural. The internet penetration rate on this continent is less than 50%. So if you are going to put forth solutions like artificial intelligence, hello, 50% of us are not even connected on the internet, okay? That is not to say that we mustn't incorporate advanced technologies in our learning models, but to say that we must leverage them or innovate other ways that are well attuned, contextualized to the reality of our people. In some parts of this country and the continent at large, there's no telecom signal, okay? So how then are you going to propose artificial intelligence as a way of accelerating education progress? We don't even have the money for it in the first place. But the point I'm trying to demonstrate is not anything against technology or anything against seeking money from our development partners, but that we must engage the mind in critical ways that accord with the reality that we're inhabiting, recognizing that as a people, Africans, we are under an existential threat. If we do absolutely nothing about our situation, we might have no continent to speak of in a very long while. Part of being on a war footing is to train our young people to know that they're coming out of school not to expect their societies to give things to them, but to expect them to make contributions to building their societies. That slight mindset shift will help us to even emphasize particular aspects of education that are going to best enable our young people to contribute to the transformation of our economies. Because ultimately, the funding challenges we have is because our economies are unable to produce sufficient economic value because they are technologically backward. If we're investing in science and technology, encouraging our young people to innovate, creating an enabling environment for them to be bold, audacious, and courageous in their thinking, then they come out thinking, how do I solve for the problems of my community? Not how does my community guarantee me a meal after educating me for 20 years?
We in Tanzania have been a German colony from 1884 to 2018 after World War I. And then we became part of the British Empire until 1961. With all these years of colonial rule, German, British, at independence, there were only 2 engineers. I want to make this clear because times people say, you know, African leaders complaining, they are doing nothing. Look here. At independence, there were only 2 engineers. Bodeminja, and there is another one. Only 2. Today, we have over 15,000 engineers. It is an investment that was made after independence. There was no university in Tanzania. it was the party that was independency that decided the headquarters that they had built for their party. It's because there was no university. And then President Nyerere said, let this be the nucleus of the university. So I want us to be cognizant of the fact that nothing has been done. Please, a lot has been done. But we are now talking of the needs of the present. The needs of the present that we have now to move from here going forward.
By implementing policies that promote inclusive economic growth, job creation and entrepreneurship, countries across Africa are striving to reduce disparities in income and access to resources. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. With less than 6 years remaining until the 2030 deadline for the Sustainable Development Goals, it's crucial that we engage in a thorough discussion about our progress, the challenges we face, and the paths forward. So what does that look like? Let's listen in.
My name is Amina Nassali. I am the president for the Youth Coalition for SDGs in Uganda. Well, my comment is about the funding gaps and how we can help bridge that gap. First and foremost, we need to look at philanthropy as a way out of this. When President Kikwete here mentioned that in Tanzania, communities went ahead and built schools. That is philanthropy at its best. So we are not going to wait for anybody to come and save us, but we need to do these things ourselves.
My name is Nanteza Nadia Mauka, a health tech entrepreneur. My company is LifeX Africa. And from the conversation I've had, I've realized that we've a bit lost value for foundational education. Currently, we are struggling with malnutrition, both over and under. We are struggling with innovation and value creation. And these are things that are taught right from childhood. There is something I do, which is having conversations with children, even in their wombs, and their mother's womb. And you realize that you can support or create a foundation of good health by just having a good conversation with your child in the womb. So conversations about political education, conversations about nutrition, health, like from childhood. We are losing talent off to European countries because everyone who comes off with value ends up going to where they can pay better. How are we going to preserve that? I think we should go back, and I've not had political education, but I really suggest we evolve it again in our primary education.
My name is Jenny Ngobi. I do serve with Akina Mama Africa, so I bring in this space a feminist angle at looking at things. So I would like to really appreciate the insightful contributions from our honorable panel. And for me, my contribution is having a reflection of us taking ourselves back to the ecosystem, to not look at things generically, but look at how both the men and women, boys and girls, are faring in terms of education. And looking at the strides we have made, I'm just inviting us to look at the ecosystem that, for example, deters the girls to achieve as much as the boys are achieving. Because if you look at the statistics all over, first of all, you'll find that in Africa, the women are commanding the biggest population. But at the same time, they have a very big and high dropout rate. So we need to look at the factors, the ecosystem. How is culture looking at the girl to getting education? And how are we preparing an environment that is enabling for the females to attain better education, just like it is, or it can be for the males? So it is really to look at the ecosystem and how we can address it to make it better.
Thank you very much. I'm retired Major General Mills. First, thank you very much for the panelists, and especially Your Excellency for putting the record very straight in terms of what are we doing now. Yes, we are recognizing what has already been done, and now we're actually looking forward. Now, my comment is on the priorities. Among the priorities that has been mentioned here, education funding, teachers training, inclusive and accessible schools, technology. One thing that I would want really to highlight is we have the often very forgotten group, and that should actually be part of those that we should focus on, the inclusiveness, those with the disabilities. We tend not to mention these ones, but these are the ones who are affected by every other problem that you are mentioning here. You go to the rural areas, you see how hopeless some of these children actually, just because of the way they are born, they don't have this access. And even when they go to schools, they are not guaranteed of the quality education because of lack of infrastructure, lack of books, quality teachers. So every other problem that we've mentioned actually affects them. Again, the problem, even when they complete the schools now, these are the ones that they don't find jobs. They are the ones that they can get jobs. So I thought this is the group that we should not lose sight on when we think of all other issues that we're talking about. Thank you.
My name is Tunsume Mlawa from Tanzania. My contribution is, I think we need to have need-based education systems, because the world is changing. The pace of changing is very fast, and the needs are not the same like in every time. So if you have a need-based education system, which are flexible, that they change, the environment is changing and the world is changing, the technology and everything, that will help the African countries to tackle to get solutions for different education challenges that we are facing right now. For instance, in Tanzania, we have a new education policy, which has included tertiary education in the system, because we had seen there is a gap on that particular area.
My name is Zena Said, I'm the Chief Secretary of Zanzibar. I want to mention the importance of nutrition in building human capital development. We sometimes forget it, but it has a very high role. We are told that the first 1,000 days from conception of pregnancy to up when the child is about 2 years is very critical to the brain development of the child. And when the brain development reached its good potential, then even the learning ability of the child is very much high. And with that, it means that even in school, they can learn better. And when they're working, they have this high level of maybe analytical skills and things like that. So we should not forget about nutrition. And we have all kinds of nutritious food. But maybe we have to make aware our population to know what choices they have to make to balance the nutrition from when the mothers are pregnant to when the child is developing, but generally even in our daily life, because yesterday we learned about health and well-being, and nutrition is at the core of it.
A lot of dropouts, those who don't even finish primary school. But we need to do more research and find out where are these numbers. Are they in urban centers? Are they in rural areas? Where are they? Then we need to go where they are and try to address problems. But in addressing these problems, we need to find who are the key players. Because education is not only for the government, it is for everybody. We need to look at the parents. How do we take public awareness, encouraging parents to educate their children?
I come back to the panel just for a very quick final comment. Ambassador, let me come to you. You kicked this all off, right? This was your context setting. Having heard from everybody else and knowing what you know, What's your message to everyone in this room about actionable next steps? What next, and what's your commitment?
I just want, in conclusion, to emphasize a few things. One is, as parents and as communities, we have to accept that we have a responsibility to raise and educate our children. Because that is important. I'm not sure if President Kikwete, I'll be going out of, you cannot produce your own children and then you hand them over to the government to feed them and to educate them. So producing children is a huge responsibility for you and for the community. But that's where Africa came from. Children were raised by the community and the family. You reach a certain age, you are going to be trained how to hunt. You reach a certain stage, you are trained how to raise a family. So that sense of the individual responsibility of parents and communities is key. Governments step in as a partner, but you cannot hand over that responsibility. So when we talk about struggling with funding education and things like that, I think we should keep that in mind, that parents, communities have a responsibility. And I'm just echoing also the strategy that was used by President Kikwete, that, it's a partnership. Do as much as you can, and the government will come in and support you. I think that will take us further. The other one is about relevance. Education for what? And as I said, it must be education for liberation. The minds of the young Africans must be attuned to the needs of today and tomorrow. Self-awareness, and the responsibility they have when they get an education. Mwalimu Nyerere in the 60s said, for the few who got this chance to go to education, he said, those who receive this privilege of going to university, and you found this in every university and every school. He says, those who receive this privilege, therefore, have a duty to repay the sacrifice that others have made. So you don't take the education and disappear, but you have a sense of responsibility to your community, to your continent. And that's something also I think we have to emphasize in our education system. Priorities is key because the numbers are huge, so we have to look at alternative sources of funding. We have to be more innovative in how we address those challenges, but also that the education addresses the actual needs of the job market, but also to unlock potentials of people. Sometimes we have an education system that tries to force every kid through the same door. But our kids have different talents. You need an education system that can identify the talents. I mean, even kids in kindergarten, you can quickly identify talents which each one has. But we don't develop those talents. We try to force everyone through the same system. And it doesn't become exciting for some of the kids, and you stifle some of the talents that they have. So we must have an education system that opens all kinds of doors and opportunities that people have. There's a story of a parent who says to the daughter, oh, you must be a doctor. I said, I don't want to be a doctor. He said, no, you have to be a doctor. So she goes and gets a medical degree and gives the parents, here is your degree, now can I do what I like? So talents of our young people, but also what they like to do, and make sure the education addresses what their interests are.
Thank you.
Finally, implementing our commitments, I think that's key. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let me come straight to Trevor.
Yes, no, briefly, to agree with everything that has been said, and especially for young people, I think we are going to have to think differently because the world has changed and the circumstances have changed, and so to engage the challenges that we face today. And some of that is going to draw on some of what has been in the past, as has been highlighted very clearly by His Excellency President Kikwete. But we're going to have to think differently. We're going to have to love our countries, love our continent, and be equipped with a mindset of dutifulness towards these places that have made us who we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. everything has been said. But I wanted to leave here with a reflection of the statistics that some of the speakers actually share on day one. The African Development Bank report suggests that every year we have 10 to 11 young people entering the workforce, and they are computing to 3 million formal jobs, which means we have 8 million job deficit every year that we need to create for us to absorb the current workforce, acknowledging that by 2050, the population of Africa will double. If we continue doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results, it's not a good strategy. So what I wanted to say is really to capitalize on what His Excellency said, to say a lot has been done. The structure of the population has changed. It's going to continue to change. But ambitious mission need distracting thinking, which is not an individual, it's an ecosystem. I think one of the commenters said it's an ecosystem. Even in funding, I don't think it's a good strategy to say we don't need a foundation. Let not leave anyone beyond. Let use an ecosystem. Let everyone bring the resource, their expertise to the table, because the problem that you are solving is as complex as one will expect it. So we shouldn't actually have a very narrow mind to say we're only looking at primary school. We should look at education as an ecosystem. And there's a lot of key players that we need to build a partnership that His Excellency said for us to move the needle. So when we meet next time, we need to reflect on these statistics. Is the number of jobless young people increasing or decreasing? That's a very clear thing to say. Are we going to actually afford a society with 8 million job deficit? Should we continue with the trajectory of young people who are neither in education, neither in employment, neither in training? We should do something different. Can we actually leverage technology to empower the teachers? Because for me, teachers are key in education. You can have your beautiful schools, you can have smart kids, but if you don't have teachers, it's all of us. So I'm just acknowledging that as COVID-19 taught us that we were in lockdown, but we're educating our society. Why? We use cell phone, we use television and radio. I think we need to ensure that there's a possibility for us to leverage, acknowledge technology, leverage it, use it as an asset for us to go quicker. That's actually my contribution. Thank you.
I gathered a few points. The first, there was emphasis on foundational learning. It is very important. We have to do that. One thing that is evident, in most of the countries, definition of education starts with primary school. We have forgotten the preschool question. Preschool is very important. The kindergartens are important to build the foundations. There is a huge crisis on the continent now. We built schools, but on foundational learning, by the age of 10, 1 in 5 children can't read a paragraph. That is one of the major crises of the present moment, which we need to address. It's a question of teachers, it's a question of the kind of infrastructure that is avoided. There was mention of the cultural problems, which the Ambassador Sefue mentioned. There is still a problem of not giving priority to girls education. When I visited 14 African countries as commissioner in the Education Commission with Gordon Brown. When I visited Chad, we were with, at that time, President Deby was still alive, Deby Sr. When I was trying to raise issues, he says, no, don't worry, feel free, President. One of the problems we have in the Sahel, girls by the age of 15, they have to get married. President Koroma can testify to this. And so he says, this is our biggest problem. He had to make a government declaration to prohibit marrying girls by the age of 15, taking them out of school. And he said, the men are fighting me. The men are fighting me. So this is one of the problems of the present day. But also we have a problem of infrastructure in the schools. Many of the girls, when they come of age, if the school infrastructure is not conducive, particularly availability of water, many of the girls opt out of school. So we have really to really look at so many other aspects that we have to look into. Even the way the facilities at the schools is another factor that discourages girls, apart from the problem of getting married. There's somebody saying 14 need-based education system. I can't agree with you more. Let me take two things from our experience. One, technology is advancing. And many jobs already being lost to technology. If we can't equip our men and women, some of us in Africa think the problem of technology does not bother us. Technology is advancing, and statistics has it that by 2050, there are going to be 230 million digital jobs to be taken in Africa. And if we don't equip our young people with the skills to take up those jobs, what happens? By that time, we will have 1.2 billion people who are young people in Africa, because the population will be 2.4 billion in Africa, and 1.2 billion of them are going to be young people. And if they don't have the skills, these are crowds ready to be rented. It is going to be a source of great instability. Come 2050, the ones we are seeing now in the Congo and everywhere else will be peanuts. There is going to be instability everywhere else. So the type of education we are giving our people now is something that we should take serious care of, so that we equip our young men and women with the skills that they need to thrive. The skills, not only, they need the skills to thrive. Either they can be fit for employment, or they can self-employ themselves. Then someone mentioned the issue of nutrition. It is important. The school feeding programs. I come from the village. After retirement, I built my home in my village. I live there. But they take me out because of these kinds of work. In our village, we have started a program of school feeding program, where we ask every family to contribute. Because there are some children who go to school. There is no breakfast at home. They stay there whole day not eating. They can't learn as much as those who come from families that have the capacity. So please, it's another aspect that we should take seriously. The school feeding program is critical. Because many of our people come from poor families, and children come from poor families, they will not be able to. So otherwise, let me simply say that the contribution by Ambassador Sefue was superb. The contribution of the panelists was another addition of a value addition to what was contributed, but the contribution by the audience has been extraordinary, and I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied as chairman of the board of GPE, Global Partnership for Education, and also as a member of the Education Commission, Financing for Global Education Opportunity. I'm going to take back these messages of the needs, the areas where we need to strengthen. Thank you very much.
So what we're hearing is inclusive strategies, policies for decent work and economic opportunities, especially for marginalized groups, and deliberate attention to inequalities to ensure equitable development. We are on the right track if we have this in mind. I've been your host, George Ndirango. Be sure to stay in touch and give us your feedback on the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute social media pages. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.